2 videos in 2 weeks? Are you mad? Well, yeah, actually kind of. So it's really going to be another episode next week too. Painting and decaling of this aircraft is going pretty smooth comparatively. Welcome back, nerds and nerdettes, by the way. You know, I have to get it in, right? It's like, this is my thing now. I've defined myself to, all 300 and something of you by doing this for the last 10 videos, and this is where we are. This is my life now. So, all right, where are we? So we primed the aircraft in the last episode, and I'm probably making a ton of noise adjusting while I sit here to record, but that's fine. We primed it. We primed it in Mr. Surfacer 1500 black. Now we're going through and we're going to kind of model in some white to the center of the panels, and that's going to bring out a lot of the detail and really break up the surface, make it more visually appealing. It's going to capture some of like the UV lightning that happens. I covered that in the last episode, talked about it to death, and it's just going to make the plane a little bit more visually appealing. Now, having seen the final result of the paint, which you will at the end of this, well, not the final result, but you'll see the coloring of the aircraft before decals, before weathering at the end of this video. I've seen it, obviously, because I'm sitting here recording, and one of the things I really wish I'd done, instead of going in for white, I think it would have been better for me to kind of model it in a lighter shade of the same color. So if I'd gone and gotten like a lighter green for the top surfaces, I think that would have been better overall, and it's something I'll likely do in the future. For the underside of the aircraft, the underside of Texas Raiders is gray, kind of more like a neutral gray. It's got a little bit more blue to it, I think, but when I tried to mix my own custom color, it went very blue and it didn't turn out right. And anyway, we'll get there later. What I wish I had done with the gray, actually the gray came out pretty well, I will say that. So the gray probably is fine with the white, but maybe a lighter shade of gray instead next time is something I will try. And I think it's just an improvement. I think ultimately this paint job is probably the best paint job I've done. The MIG included, if you haven't watched that, banner at the top of the screen now. Lovely digital camo on that aircraft. Still very proud of that one. Kind of a transitional model for me, I think, is going from early skills in airbrushing to starting to get a little bit more advanced. Also, I bought a better airbrush in the middle of that build, so it worked out pretty well. Back to Texas Raiders, though. The red that goes on the wingtips, the horizontal tail, and the vertical tail, I think that also could have been better modeled in, like, maybe I got a lighter red or a pink color before putting the red down, because what happens is you get this very, very stark contrast between the white and the black. And the white gets covered up perfectly. The black gets, is still very, very evident visually. Getting a little bit of a stronger light pigment down first, I think, would have been better. So I think it would have been a nicer thing to kind of coat it in that lighter color, do a light coat around the panel line edges, and then do a little bit of a heavier coat in that lighter color towards the center of the panel, and then go into the final coloring, and hopefully it wouldn't be as drastic of an appearance, but this is something I'll try next time. I may try this on Memphis Belle, which Memphis Belle is interesting because, like, the Texas Raiders HKM kit, or the HKM kit in general, it's a gray plastic, whereas the Memphis Belle's a dark green plastic. So in theory, the Mr. Surfacer should take that effect out. But if I wasn't using the Mr. Surfacer black, that could actually be a factor. So just things to think about in the future. We're quite a ways away from paint on the Memphis Belle anyway. I still need to score the panel lines in the other wing and look at the fuselage and see what I'm going to do for that. Go back to the frustration of lapped panels versus actual panel seam. Initially, when I painted this aircraft, and this is the paint you're watching Hi, can I help you? Okay. The intern is crying. That's Bucky. He's a rescue from a bridge, actually. Yes, you. Hi, I see you. Anyway, back to the story. I painted this in my own concoction of kind of like a light gray plus a little bit of blue plus a little bit of buff. And I didn't really, it didn't come out right. It was too blue. And I'm not the best at judging color. I do, I'll sit there and I'll look at a color and be like, yeah, okay, this is what I think it is, and I'll mix it up, and it is absolutely not what I think it is, which is most of the reason why I don't do art. Other than this, arguably, question mark. Is this art? Might be. It's painting. It counts, I think. With extremely heavy instructions, it counts. Anyway, back to the main point. So, I did talk to a friend, and neutral gray is the way to go. I also looked at the Texas Raiders decal set that I got, and it also basically says, go for a neutral mid-gray. So I whipped on down to my local hobby shop, Hurricane Hobbies, and grabbed some neutral gray. Quick, in and out, easy, 5 minutes tops. So, came back, painted over. Of course, because I'm painting over this paint that I applied, that means that I ended up with it being a little bit more muted on the modeling. I apologize if you can hear rustling in the background. The bridge cat has found a bag and is now playing with it. But yes, so it did fade out the modeling a little bit. It's still there. It's just not as pronounced, which frankly I'm okay with. The modeling I'm really doing, to just experiment with it because I want to do it on some future airplanes. But also, the recipient of Memphis Belle really wants me to capture UV damage to the top of the aircraft. We're going for a in-service look for that airplane, not an in-museum look for that airplane. So getting the UV correct is it's good practice to do it on Texas Raiders first, particularly because this is going to be my plane. Probably going to live at the office next to 909 for a little while, and then I'll rotate 909 home. There's no need to have two B-17s at the same desk. That's a little excessive, particularly when they're both 48 scale. For paint color ordering, I wanted to work light to dark. That makes covering easier. So the bottom side of the aircraft, as you can tell, we're getting this gray color. The top side is getting a little bit of a darker green. I did not mask any of the intersections between the green and the gray. It's very evidently not masked on the actual Texas Raiders aircraft as she flew. So I just decided to freehand it, and it came out pretty well. It's important to note for an aircraft this size that you really want good control over the air hose to the airbrush itself. What can happen if you're not careful is you touch the side of the model and then start dragging it. In the B-17's case, you've got gun barrels sticking out, so A, those are likely to get broken if you're not careful. B, you're going to drag it across your freshly applied paint, and that's not a great place to be, because realistically speaking, you're going to start scratching up the paint before it cures. You may wipe some of it off. You're going to do quite a bit of damage to the visual appearance of said paint. So just be careful where your air hose is going. Conveniently, that's a problem for painting full-size airplanes as well. But the B-17 at 1:48 scale is not a small aircraft. So, she barely even fits in the screen right now. Never mind in the paint booth that I bought. And I kind of talked about that in the last episode, right? It does actually give me a good amount of concern as well, because I have a bunch of Lancasters. I love the Avro Lancaster aircraft. It is one of the coolest planes in my opinion. I don't know where I'm going to put them when they're built. Also bigger than the Lancaster, well, the 48 scale Lancasters, because I do have two 32nd scale Lancasters, but the 1:48 B-29 that I have as well also is enormous. I'm going to have to build a new bench. I'm going to have to move in order to display the thing. I'm a little concerned about it, and that's why I'm not building them this year or anytime, in the foreseeable present or future short term. Also important to note, if you have your airplane on a stand or have your model airplane on a stand, once you've painted it, you don't want to flip it back over immediately and have the stand start rubbing on that uncured paint. Realistically speaking, in this video and on this model, I'm waiting about a day between flips, as it were. in order to let the paint cure up a little bit. Also, the paint stand I'm using is of my own design and fits this aircraft almost a little bit too well. But it also has some padding that I've applied onto the interfaces between the aircraft and the stand itself. And that's purely just to cushion the paint a little bit and avoid scraping it with the hard edge of some plastic. Alright guys, let's talk about painting a little bit more, which routinely, this is going to be the same as every other video, and it's the same as the MiG in most cases. Effectively, what's going to change between model is going to be either the type of paint, or I'm going to throw a couple new things in here. It's not going to evolve drastically between models. It's just going to be a, hey, on this kit, I'm going to use pigments on the landing gear, and that's the big change, right? Or in the case of this one, it's I did a model pre-application of white underneath the regular paint to just give it some visual interest. Realistically speaking, paint is paint. It doesn't change that much. All of these paints are effectively being mixed to a 50-50 ratio, except the alclads that are on the screen right now. Alclads essentially come pretty much ready to spray out of an airbrush. The alclad primers run through the airbrushes with no problems. I'm seeing that downlock on that left hand main landing gear, and it's just killing me every time I see it. It's fixed now, but every time I see it, it just drives me crazy. But back to paint, sorry, ADHD aside. Every paint, especially the Tamiya paints, are all going to be mixed around 50-50 or slightly thinner. I typically do it with syringes, or I count drops of paint, or I actually count volume on the syringe. Sometimes you're painting onesie-twosie little things. It doesn't take a whole lot of paint to do it, so I just count drops, right? If you're having an issue where it's kind of sputtering out of your airbrush, you need it to be thinner. If it's spraying out of your airbrush and it's just kind of streaking and very heavy on the liquid side, not so much on the paint side, it's too thin. You need more paint. Just work with that, right? Start at 50-50, adjust it how you need to get it right for your airbrush. And I think that's one of the reasons I struggled with my previous airbrush in the MiG video. That and its age, it had painted about 10, 11 models at that point, and it's a much cheaper airbrush than the one I'm using now. You get what you pay for, unfortunately, with most things in life. So that's kind of how we go for paint. Alclads, for the most part, they're ready to spray, as I mentioned. In order to get a good alclad finish, you need to have a black base layer and as high gloss black as you can. You really want it to be a smooth base layer, and that's what's going to make it pop out the most. You're going to religiously start applying primer for your alclad paints in order to get them to look, like this or better. Yeah, so what is this on the bottom of the B-17's wing? It's effectively just heat shielding, right? Your turbo supercharger is an energy collection device. It is intended to boost the pressure of the air going into the engine. In order to do that, we have to capture, or the intent is we capture energy from the air that's coming out, or the exhaust that's coming out of the engine. Anytime you are capturing energy, there is loss, right? Nothing on the planet is 100% efficient. Turbo superchargers in the 1940s are very far from 100% efficient. So what that means is for every joule of energy we capture from this hot exhaust, a certain percentage of it is just absolute waste, right? And waste mostly in mechanical components comes from heat. Aluminum doesn't really like high temperatures, especially not that of exhaust heat. Engine exhaust usually is in the realm of 2000-ish degrees. Exposure to that level of heat will cause material strength loss over time. So here we'll put, the designers would put on, stainless steel panels or some stainless steel heat shielding. Steel's got a much higher heat tolerance than aluminum does, and that's what this is. Then you end up, you don't necessarily always want to paint it. Painting a high temperature surface is very tricky. If you really want to, go do some background research, the XB70, during its initial prototype test flights, it threw a bunch of its paint off every time just from heat effect to the paint. The SR-71 had a special paint developed for it because effectively it would turn purple when you put a regular black paint on it, and it would go out flying just because of heat. So yeah, that's why we've got our stainless steel heat shields on the bottom of the B-17s around the turbo superchargers, is purely thermal protection. Safety glasses off, tidbit over. So, B-17s frequently, not always, have anti-icing boots on them. I say not always because during World War II, when the B-17s are flying over, flak anti-aircraft defense, which flak, if you're not aware, it's basically shrapnel in the middle of an explosive charge or around an explosive charge. So when it explodes, it just throws shrapnel everywhere, cuts up the aircraft, and really does damage, right? So flak is going to attack the leading edges of the aircraft the most because the aircraft's going to fly into the flak just as the flak is hitting into the aircraft. Your inflatable anti-icing boots on the front of the wing are going to take a beating. So a lot of B-17s in World War II, they took the anti-icing boots off or made them in-op because realistically, every time they're going flying, a bunch of the squadron's coming back with damaged anti-icing boots. So unless you really, really need them, that's not really a good reason to keep doing that. At that point, you're just feeding anti-icing boots to the Germans. If anybody's familiar with that reference. But yeah, so I went ahead and painted them onto Texas Raiders. Again, the Texas Raiders wasn't a, Army Air Corps bomber. So I thought it was a good visual detail. It's funny looking at that seam line on the leading edge of the wing because it does not look that bad in person. It might be just because we're zoomed in so far, but it is a pain in the butt. And I will give some advice to anybody else building the HK B-17. The landing light. I haven't figured out exactly how to do this and make it look clean on the HK kit. The only thing I can come up with is, glue it into the HK kit once the wings are put together. And if you have like an insert that you could put into the landing light that's the correct shape, that gets rid of that seam line, I think that would be maybe the only way to do it. Or actually, you know what? Some bare metal foil would probably be a good application there. Cut a hole in the center of the bare metal foil very carefully, and then lay it in around the aircraft, and don't pat it into the seam too much. I think that would be the best way to do it while retaining a functional light bulb. Otherwise, if you're not putting a functional light in here like I am, you can just sand it. Like you've got access to it. It's not that difficult. But in order to keep the LED in there, it's very tricky. Like this is one of the other areas I'll give the Revell some credit. It was a lot easier to do this on the Revell. Finally, we've reached the point where we clear coat, and the clear coat's just in preparation for decals, which are coming next. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, follow, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.